Welcome to MALDEF's 2013 Latino State of the Union. I'm Giselle Fernandez, your host and your moderator. Today's discussion is being broadcast nationally on KCET Link, and we'd like to thank KCET Link for their dedication to the Latino community and their partnership with MALDEF. The Latino community faces significant challenges in working to shape a national policy agenda that incorporates our growing concerns and that will achieve a bright national future for all. Today, we promise a lively and provocative discussion that will help us to better understand and take on those challenges. But before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about MALDEF. MALDEF is the nation's leading Latino legal civil rights organization, often described as the Latino legal voice for the civil rights in America. MALDEF is an organization that promotes social change through advocacy, communications, community education, and litigation in the areas of education, employment, immigrant rights, and political access. Let's take a look.
MALDEF was created by a group of community leaders in the Latino community, lawyers and others, who saw the need in the court system for representation of the Latino community and an organization that was dedicated to promoting the civil rights of Latinos. At the time in 1968, the Latino population was concentrated in the Southwest, as well as with pockets in Chicago, New York, and Florida. And in all of those areas where there were significant Latino populations, there were widespread patterns of exclusion, discrimination at work, discrimination in the schools, discrimination throughout society. And there was a need to be able to call on a legal organization to challenge that exclusion and discrimination in the courts.
There's many components of what MALDEF does: litigation, advocacy, and education. And MALDEF has been uncompromising in its efforts to advance the education levels of Latinos in America.
Our effort is to ensure that every Latino has the rights guaranteed them by the Constitution, whether that's in education, or in employment, or in voting, or in ensuring that laws don't target Latinos or others based on their immigration status or their assumed immigration status.
As we all know, the anti-immigrant rhetoric hits across the board and has had such tremendous impact. But the work that MALDEF has done in showing that this Constitution is to work for every single one of us has been so very effective. And it's unfortunate that we have to go to this level, but again, all civil rights, our civil rights are not going to be won by just talking about it. It's going to be about taking the kind of legal action that we need to take in our courts. But if you don't have MALDEF and the kind of experience and tenacity and devotion of lawyers, as well as the talent of those lawyers, nothing will change, and our community benefits by MALDEF's work.
What I'm most proud of about MALDEF is how it has withstood the test of time as an organization for the advocacy and litigation and education of Latinos in America, and that they have been surviving and fighting relentlessly to protect the constitutional rights of Latinos living in America. I take pride in that. I take pride in knowing not only I'm a board member, but knowing that our community is in great hands.
So I'm proud of the efforts of our policy staff, of our legislative attorneys nationwide, from DC to all of the state capitals, in working to ensure that we have laws that better protect the civil rights of Latinos and better serve our national interests in inclusion and incorporation of all communities in our future progress. But we also recognize that the opportunities to push back on those who would seek to restrict the rights of Latinos, who would seek to restrict the application of our long-standing constitutional principles and values, those opportunities, coupled with the challenges of a growing demand for our services, is something that the dedicated staff of MALDEF is looking forward to pursuing with great vigor throughout this decade.
It is a new era. The landscape of America has been changing in a Latino way for a while. I see great things for MALDEF. The future is bright for MALDEF. They have proven time and time again that they are the first organization to take action legally and say, we are going to protect our community through the Constitution of the United States. Great things lie ahead. Every challenge that is going to face the Latino community, MALDEF welcomes it.
My honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the Latino State of the Union, the Honorable Hilda L. Solis was confirmed as United States Secretary of Labor on February 24, 2009, becoming the first Latina in our country's history to be appointed to a cabinet of a President of the United States. She was a Congresswoman for 8 years, representing California's 32nd Congressional District. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to the Honorable Hilda Solis.
Thank you. Hola and buenas tardes. Thank you, Giselle. It's great to be back with you again and with MALDEF for the Latino State of the Union address. And thanks to everyone at MALDEF and the Time Warner and to those watching this national broadcast online. Thanks for what you do every day to help our country fulfill its promise to hardworking Latino families. I want to speak for a few minutes about President Obama's vision for the advancement of Latinos in our U.S. economy. Last week in his State of the Union address, the President laid out his vision for building a strong middle class and a stronger America. In that speech, the President spoke about a central role for restoring a thriving middle class, which I believe includes the Latino community. As former Secretary of Labor, I too am inspired and empowered by his words. In the last 35 months, American businesses have added more than 6.1 million jobs. Well over 500,000 of those jobs have been created in manufacturing alone. And when I look back on the last 4 years, I'm so proud to have worked alongside this president in all that we have accomplished. But the president and I recognize that Latinos across this country are still hurting from the effects of the Great Recession. Many are still struggling to carry their families through these very challenging times. We still have so much to do, particularly when we look at the potential for comprehensive immigration reform and how this can contribute to an economic boon for the country. So I want to talk about our agenda to make the State of the Union even stronger for Latinos across America. First, by building a stronger middle class where we prioritize education from preschool through K-12 and higher education. We must ensure that Latinos receive the best advanced training in manufacturing, high-tech, healthcare, and green renewable energy. We must demand focused attention on STEM jobs of the future, beginning with support for affordable education at the community college and four-year universities. If we neglect these investments, then we will shortchange Latinos from achieving their full potential as competitors in this global economy, especially when you think about that in just a few years, Latinos will represent well over 20% of the U.S. labor force. We therefore must focus our attention on equipping our Latino youth with meaningful tools for success in an ever-changing workforce. We still have hurdles to overcome, like curtailing the high dropout rate amongst Latino youth. 1 in 4 American-born Latinos drops out of high school, and 1 in 2 Latinos born outside of the U.S. doesn't finish high school. And as a result, statistics show that those Latinos with high dropout rates suffer from longer periods of high unemployment, while those with advanced degrees have lower rates of unemployment and find employment much quicker. That's why the President continues to call for more financial aid in the form of Pell Grants and guaranteed student loans to ease the burden of the high cost of education, especially for low-income and first-generation Latinos. We must reach even further to make sure that Latinos are prepared today for the jobs of tomorrow. And it begins by supporting career academies in our high schools so students can earn credentials in technical fields while also duly enrolling at community colleges. This emphasis will provide more employment opportunities and career choices that can sustain families. This model is used in Germany and in other U.S. schools and has kept them competitive globally in major markets. The President, as you know, is promoting our advancement in high-growth industries like in healthcare, advanced manufacturing, renewable energy. No wonder we currently see trends in green jobs showing better paying salaries upwards of 16% higher than other medium paying jobs. And in the last few years, well over 3.1 million jobs have been created in the green job sector. In fact, green jobs are found in manufacturing, farming, transportation, construction, and sanitation. What this means is that Latinos certainly have a good chance of landing these green jobs, since we're already well represented in these industries. The caveat, however, is that we need Latinos to receive industry-recognized credentials, and those can be obtained in vocational technical schools and community colleges. And for those seeking four-year degrees in these industries, the employment outlook is even greater. In my opinion, this is how we reinvigorate the middle class and create opportunities for Latinos in our economy. The President has said, time over time, that if you work hard and you play by the rules, that you should have an opportunity to succeed and provide for your well-being. That is why I believe it's important to emphasize worker safety and protections in the workplace. Any discussion about strengthening the middle class has to include the dignity and respect of all workers. As former Labor Secretary, I made worker protection one of my top priorities. We must not go back on this during this next term. The Department of Labor established several memorandum of understandings with Mexico, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and the Nicaraguan embassies. The sole purpose was to advance the protection of our Latino brothers and sisters who work in low-paying and difficult sectors like construction, agriculture, and hotel and restaurant industries. Many migrant workers are afraid to report mistreatment, harassment, and retaliation because it can lead to more abuse or loss of their job. That's why the Department of Labor has provided information forums on worker training at the grassroots level and partnered with worker rights organizations. These forums are also provided to businesses that employ migrant workers to reduce injuries on the job and clarify existing federal laws that they must abide by. Last year, the Wage and Hour Division recouped over $240 million for over 300,000 low-wage workers. Additionally, over 300 wage and hour investigators were hired to specifically work with low-wage and vulnerable workers. It makes good sense to hire investigators that were also bilingual and could speak the various languages needed to assist the workers. And it's imperative that until we achieve comprehensive immigration reform, that workers not be denied the right of federal minimum wage or overtime. We must remain committed to ensuring that Latino workers are safe on the job and fairly compensated for their hard work. And finally, the President's plan for a strong middle class and strong America must include all people. In the State of the Union, the President again called out the need to fix our broken immigration system. Congress must act now, and in fact, with the fall elections behind us, there is more bipartisan support for comprehensive immigration reform. The President, in his remarks to Congress, said that a strong economy should include harnessing the talents and ingenuity of striving and hopeful immigrants. And at this time, leaders from business, labor, and law enforcement, and faith communities all agree it's time to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And real reform means strong border security, establishing a pathway to earn citizenship, a pathway that includes passing a background check, paying back taxes and/or a penalty, learning English, and getting in the back of the line. The President also spoke about fixing the legal immigration system by cutting waiting periods, reducing bureaucracy, and attracting highly skilled entrepreneurs and engineers that could create jobs and grow our economy. But we must not forget those dreamers that came here through no fault of their own, who can also contribute to a thriving economy built by the children of immigrants. A recent study by UCLA indicates that dreamers could contribute up to $3.5 trillion to the U.S. economy during their lives. The American public has shown overwhelming support of immigration reform as long as it is earned. But you and I know that the work will get harder, and therefore it is essential that we not sit back. We must take action by calling on our elected officials in Washington to pass a comprehensive immigration bill this year. It will require an education campaign that draws from all of our communities by holding forums, writing letters or emails, and convening community briefings for everyone. This is a chance of a lifetime to change the direction of the country, and Latinos have a lot to gain if we unify behind one another. And we must reach out to our other African American, Asian, and other brothers and sisters in our communities and bring them all along. This is indeed a make or break moment for the Latino community. Latinos in the middle class and all those trying to get into the middle class need our help now more than ever. So I hope everyone will join us and the President in meeting this moment for Latino families. Thank you for participating in this conversation today, and sí se puede.
Thank you, Secretary Solis. I asked her when I saw her earlier how she was liking retirement, and she bristled at the word, and I'm sure the idea, so I look forward to hearing what your next chapter is going to be as well. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Thomas A. Saenz, President and General Counsel of MALDEF. Tom is one of our country's most respected and experienced civil rights lawyers and leaders. He is a summa cum laude graduate of Yale with degrees in history and political economy. He received his Juris Doctorate in 1991 from Yale Law School, where he received awards for moot court and for clinical work. In the 1990s, Tom led MALDEF in a successful challenge of California's Proposition 187, which would have denied countless immigrants critical public services. Saenz also was lead counsel in several important challenges to anti-day labor ordinances, in 2 challenges to California's Proposition 227, which mandated English-only instruction in classrooms. In a challenge to California's 2001 congressional redistricting plan and in many other civil rights lawsuits, he also initiated a lawsuit that led to a $50 million employment discrimination settlement against Abercrombie and Fitch. Between 2005 and 2009, when he returned to MALDEF as president, Tom served as counsel to Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa for 4 years, where as a member of the mayor's 4-person executive team, he advised the mayor on critical issues like education reform, labor relations, litigation risk avoidance, and living wage laws. Please welcome Tom Saenz, the President and General Counsel of MALDEF, and who many call the rock star of justice.
Thank you, Giselle, for that overly generous introduction. And welcome all of you to this critical discussion. Thank you, Secretary Solis, for giving us such a strong start to a discussion of the issues that are central of concern to the Latino community. We know that your steady integrity and commitment will be sorely missed in the Cabinet and in Washington, but we also know that you'll still be contributing as a private citizen today and hopefully in the future as a government leader once again. Welcome all of you. The discussion that we're going to have today is critically important, but it's important to note that it's a different discussion than it might have been a year ago or even 4 months ago. And that's because, as we all know, the November election constitute a positive recalibration of our nation's thinking about the Latino community. A recalibration for some, but really a confirmation and vindication for others who have seen the reality and identified the truth of Latino community's contributions to this country and our interest in devising smart public policy for the entire nation. Still, the issue of how to characterize that recalibration sticks. When you listen to the pundits on election day, so many of them talked about this as a matter of numbers. And indeed, it's true, the numbers are quite impressive. 12.5 million Latino voters in that presidential election. Looking at our population, 1 in 6 Americans now Latino. 1 in 5 of every public school student across the nation, and 1 in 4 of those of preschool age. But I think the true story of that election is not about numbers. It's about the wisdom and discernment of Latino voters who would not be swayed, who would not be fooled by an unexplained and conveniently timed shift in a candidate's position on the critical issue of immigration. The strategy seemed to be you could say one thing in primary season and another in the general election, and Latino voters would not notice or care. The results proved that strategy to be disastrously wrong. We've seen this before. In my home state of California, we recently had a gubernatorial candidate who thought she could put forth a position on immigration in English that was markedly different from the position she put forth in Spanish. That too did not work. And so I think the message of last November is about the wisdom and discernment of our Latino voters and of our broader Latino community, a community that is now ready to take on its critical role as the nation's largest minority community in shaping a public policy for all of America that will work for the 21st century community in this country. But it does mean that our political leaders need to understand that we will not stand for having that same disastrous strategy as an electoral strategy repeated when it comes to policy making. Policy matters, and we in the Latino community will evaluate the truth and the details of the policies that are implemented. We want policies that reflect constitutional principles that have served this country so well for so long. We want policies that are adapted to 21st century America, including that increasing component that is Latino. There are some who will hear what I am saying as some sort of call for special treatment. But those sentiments come out of their own entrenchment in the status quo. The simple truth is that throughout our history, our policies have been adapted and adopted with an eye to the realities of the communities living in this nation. For example, our school calendars are based on the demands of an agrarian economy, even for those today and in the past who weren't living on farms. And today, of course, we are developing new policies in light of the many who are involved in important First Amendment activities on the internet. So when calling for a Latino-influenced and devised public policy for America, we fall in line with a long tradition of those who are coming to the fore, seeking, identifying, and supporting policies that will serve the entire nation, but that are adapted to the realities of today. A few examples. You will not, we must say to our political leaders, you will not fool us by labeling something immigration reform that doubles down on enforcement policies that are far too broadly implemented and far too unfair in their impact. You will not get away with passing something called immigration reform that places a long and unreasonable period of time for those who have labored so tenaciously in support of our country, but who have done so without legal protections. We will evaluate the truth of what you label immigration reform, and what we will expect are new policies that reflect the realities of today. In the Latino community, for example, we understand that this notion of waiting in line that has been articulated by leaders from across the political spectrum is a fallacy. Because we know from our family's experiences that it is not one line, that we have an immigration policy that on its face discriminates on the basis of national origin and race. We have an immigration policy that puts you in a different line if you are from Mexico, a much, much longer line than those from anywhere else in the world. We have an immigration policy that continues to have different lines based on who your family is, where you call home, what your racial background may be. So when you tell us that immigration reform must include waiting in line, we know that that is empty rhetoric. And we will demand and expect an immigration reform that recognizes the discrimination in our existing policies that have created the numbers of undocumented individuals in this country, and expect that discrimination to be repaired in any legalization program. One more example. In the area of education, we can and must demand accountability for the entire education system to close the achievement gap. Too often, debates about accountability in education today focus on students and punishing them for their performance, teachers and principals, and imposing sanctions on them. But what we must demand and expect in policy is system accountability for closing the achievement gap. That means a much stronger federal role, because we know from our family's experiences that may move from one state to another. We know that we must have uniform federal standards and expectations about serving all students, including Latino students. It means adopting new policies that recognize that existing accountability measures involving elections of local school board members cannot well serve a community where too many parents lack the right to vote, lack the ability to vote, lack the ability to meaningfully influence those elections. We must then demand systems that guarantee meaningful parental engagement beyond simply participating in the election of a school board. We must demand accountability so that our parents in Latino communities have the right and ability of other parents to ensure that their students, not just their own, but from their entire community, are well served by our schools. These are just two examples of our responsibility after November in the Latino community to contribute to adopting new public policies that serve a 21st century America, an increasingly Latino America, but these are policies that will serve everyone, policies consistent with our Constitution, but reflecting the realities of today. We have much to add to this debate, but our effectiveness will only be proven when we continue to demonstrate, as I know we will, the wisdom and discernment that was demonstrated in November by separating policies that are empty promises from real practices adapted to today. We can and will derive Latino-driven policies to serve all of America. That conversation, discussion, begins today. All of us will be incredibly important participants. Let's get started.
Thank you, Tom. We have just come out of a precedent-setting election where the Latino vote has made the difference in deciding our president's second term, as Tom so well pointed out. This shift in political clout has propelled the Latino community's contributions to the national stage like never before. And therefore, the opportunity for greater understanding and therefore change has never been more prevalent. But our mirror has two faces. On the one hand, we demonstrate significant political clout, yet we have insufficient or disproportionate representation in high offices, corporate board seats, executive ranks across most disciplines in this nation. We still don't have a seat at the table. While we are the fastest growing demographic in the country, we are amongst the poorest, hardest hit by the mortgage crisis, high unemployment. It belies a powerful trillion-dollar buying power. We have least access to collateral to grow our businesses. While we make up a quarter of the college-age population in this country, we graduate only 12%, and very few of them in math and science. 36% of our kids live in poverty. The dichotomy could not be more glaring. For the first time, we have a real shot at reforming immigration, and yet we are still deporting more of our people than any other time in history. While we have halted deportation of the Dreamers, there is still no sure pathway for them to citizenship yet. So we face a time, yes, of great hope and promise, but still great challenges. So today, we have an opportunity to discuss ways to best navigate towards equity so we can capitalize on this moment of great potential. And it's this duality that is the focus of our panel today. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you our very distinguished panel. Hector Sanchez is the Executive Director of the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. He has over 10 years' experience in policy, advocacy research, and community outreach. He is currently the chair of the National Leadership Agenda, which is composed of 30 of the leading national and regional Hispanic civil rights and public policy organizations. Welcome, Hector. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Araceli Munoz-Petrich is Associate General Counsel of the Association of Corporate Counsel, the district-based group representing in-house lawyers. She leads the group's programs for large law departments and chief legal officers, respectively. Previously, she was the director of the American Bar Association's Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity and assistant corporate counsel of the Labor Division for Legal Officers. Welcome. Also joining us on our panel is the Honorable Hilda Solis and Thomas Saenz, President and General Counsel of MALDEF. Welcome to you all. I'd like to get raw and gritty and real on the state of Latinos' life in America. So we'll get started. Tom, I'd like to start with you. As we've said, we've just flexed some serious political muscle. For the first time, the nation sees the powerful voice Latinos have in America. We may have known it, perhaps the nation didn't see it as powerfully as in the re-election of Barack Obama. What concrete changes will we see as a result of this display of power? Cabinet posts? Will we see a real focus on the education crisis in our community? Will we have access to collateral and investments in our business so we can propel our middle class? Will we see just immigration reform?
I think the answer, Giselle, is largely up to us. I think it's a matter of reinforcing the lesson of November over and over again, because regrettably, our political leadership of all stripes often has to be repeatedly reminded of the importance of the Latino community and of our interest, as I explained, in having policies that are real. We're not interested in symbols, we're not interested in token representation, we're not interested in slogans that hide policies that are actually to our detriment. We have a real interest in policies that are going to serve our community and the entire country, and we have to demonstrate that. And we demonstrate that by ensuring that what happened in November is repeated in the elections in 2014, that it's repeated in the state and local elections that are happening right now around the country in 2013, that it's repeated in our engagement continually on all of these issues and demanding real immigration reform, demanding real reform to education that will serve our community, demanding representation not just at the highest levels. We're not going to be fooled by one token appointment at the highest level. We want to see representation throughout government, those who are at mid-level in charge of implementing all the critical programs across the country. We are looking for that kind of representation, and we have to make that clear time and time again.
All right, but actually turning the talk into action and making change, that's like the critical juxtaposition there. Hector, your organization has made, let's say, cabinet posts as a result of our powerful turnout in this election a priority above any other policy issues. How are you holding the President and the White House accountable for making sure that as a result of our powerful vote, we're going to have members of the Latino community in the cabinet?
First of all, thank you to MALDEF and Tom Sainz for inviting me. This is a real honor to be in company of such a great group of panelists. Let me start by saying something. The name of this event is Latino State of the Union. After this year, the Latino State of the Union is going to be very different. What happened, like you say, Tom and Secretary Solis, after this election is really going to change the perspective in which, as a community, we advocate, we negotiate at all different levels. At a time when we are under a serious attack as a community, we say enough. We embrace democracy, and we came in historical numbers to vote. But now, after the election, we need to make sure that we are strong, we are strategic, and we are aggressive to make sure that we are really advocating for those issues that are central priority for our community. We are extremely disappointed with the President after this election in terms of cabinet positions. The window is closing. And the President said it before his election. If I win this election, it's going to be because of the Latino vote. And it's unacceptable that we are about to not have a single Latino in the cabinet at a time when we are negotiating an issue as important as immigration is understandable. It's key to have people in the main table of these negotiations that understands the issue, that has empathy for the issue, that is going to be advocating for the issue. I can think of a great champion such as Secretary Solis that was an exemplary leader of the community, fighting for workers' rights, but also advocating for a lot of the issues that are central for our community. So it's really unacceptable. As a coalition, we're putting a lot of pressure on the administration, asking for what is fair for the community, which is 3 Latinos cabinet appointments, and we're going to keep putting pressure on the administration and really making sure that we get what is just fair and for the community to have an honest representation in this cabinet.
Hector, as you know, we're not just losing Secretary Solis, but also Secretary of the Interior Ken Salazar. Mm-hmm. So we don't have any Latinos now in the cabinet. Secretary Solis, how committed is the President to keeping his word and putting the members of the Latino community in the cabinet?
Well, my understanding is that they are committed to at least having 2 more cabinet members that represent our community. But I think something that is very important that Tom said was that it's really upon us the role of how we advance ourselves is also by keeping the pressure on and making sure that other positions, assistant secretary positions, are available. And I would just tell you, as someone who's been in meetings at the White House, not everything is done at a cabinet meeting. Most of the work really gets done by our staff and by other individuals at the White House. And I'll tell you that there are some very clear advocates there. I can think of Cecilia Munoz. I can think of Julia Rodriguez. I can think of other people that I know that have been fighting very, very forcefully. Now, do we need more people involved in that debate and that discussion regarding immigration and how Latinos are treated? Absolutely. But I do know that we have some sensitive individuals that may not all represent Latino surnames, but nevertheless they are advocating for our positions. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be pushing, and I agree that the community has a stake in this. And it goes well beyond that, because you have different forces that are pushing many discussions, especially on immigration. You've got business community, you've got business interests, agribusiness, and what are we doing to help counter that? And that's where I think we also have to be very vigilant, because we have to be able to articulate what kind of immigration reform that we really want, that doesn't disadvantage or create another guest worker program or bracero program, or minimize or create a system that's going to take 20 years to become legalized. So I think that the voices from our community have to be heard, and it doesn't, I think that for us to simply say that it comes from 2 people or 3 people in the cabinet is not a correct assessment, because we can do more, we should do more, but it also comes from other people that are working with us, our allies in the administration as well as on the Hill, in Congress and the Senate.
Tom, having a seat at the table is imperative because it sends a very clear message to the rest of the nation about our voice. We only have less than 2% of Latinos on corporate boards, yet we have a $1 trillion buying power in the consumer space. What is it going to take for us to break this barrier to entry? I know Araceli as well, there's only 3% of lawyers are Latinos. We are seeing this across the board. We have tremendous potential, tremendous voice. We're not in decision-making positions yet. Why?
We have to make it clear, as I think we are beginning to do and have tried over years and years, that we care about these issues. That all of the Latino voters, 12.5 million in November, and the future Latino voters, and those who are not registered but should be registering, that they care about these issues. That we are going to expect not just immigration reform, but we are going to expect that our education system will solve the achievement gap. That it will put in place the systems to ensure that we can guarantee that that gap will be closed, so that we will have better representation among lawyers, in business, in media. We also have to make clear that all of those consumers that you've cited care about these issues. We have to voice our concerns about the lack of representation. It is absolutely clear that we need representation throughout, not just at the CEO level, but having representation at the CEO level, just as having representation at in the cabinet, is critically important. Not just because it makes sure that at the highest levels that are directing those lower levels, that our voices are heard, our concerns are understood, but also because of the critical importance that young people see, that there are no limits to their potential for the future. That the Latino community, as it becomes more and more a critical part of this country, will have a seat at the table, whether it's the cabinet table in the White House or the board of directors table in the Fortune 500. We have to have that representation to demonstrate that we will be represented and that our future will be represented.
So how do we hold the White House, corporate America, accountable? In the old days, with MALDEF and other rights organizations, it was the boycott. What action do we take today so that we don't have to wait for a very controversial and heated re-election to mobilize and activate our community to unify? What is it going to take for us to activate and say education, immigration reform, a seat at the table is that important? You said it's up to us, Tom. Araceli, how do you studied this issue at the ABA? How do you break those barriers to entry?
Well, I plan to, again, thank Tom for putting this together in MALDEF, and I'm really glad that I've had the opportunity to be here as a commissioner of the ABA Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities. And as you mentioned, over the last 2 years, the Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities took on the endeavor of going across the country to hear from the Latino community in all its facets, as Tom mentioned, about how we overcome these barriers. What are we doing and how are we actively engaged in this process? And it runs the gamut. I think that we are working with organizations like MALDEF to bring cases. We came out to vote. 10% of the population, the voting population were Latinos. And part of it is, too, going beyond voting and taking our own civic engagement to that next level, serving on juries, running for office, being engaged in our local schools. And so it's not just a matter of what are the challenges, but what are our current efforts and what are some best practices that we're seeing that we can share with other Latino communities across the country.
I know as we focus on the challenges we face, you came with a very bright and rosy perspective, having done your own big State of the Union, in a way, with the ABA and a commission with Tom, that took a look at what the challenges, yes, were amongst Latinos in America, but also you found some very promising statistics. So just to give us a window into a brighter side, why don't you share some of those with us?
Well, I mean, I think there's great hope on the horizon. You know, we are 74% of the Latino population are U.S. citizens, which means we have a stake in the civic life of this country. And I think that we came out and showed that. And I think that's a very positive step forward. Even most recently in some of the Supreme Court cases currently attacking affirmative action, U.S. corporations, Fortune 100 companies, came forth and recognized the global business imperative to have diversity and inclusion. And really challenging to look beyond it just being affirmative action for Latinos, but for a global community. So I think that's very hopeful that we are engaged in that manner. So it really runs the gamut in the positive contributions that our community is making. I mean, Latino businesses generate $345 billion in revenue. That's an amazing statistic. So I do think that there are some misperceptions about the community and that we do often get categorized in this monolithic paradigm. But we are very diverse even in our own community.
Tom, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that diversity is absolutely true. But I think part of what has to be conveyed is that we as a community have community concerns. That doesn't mean 100% of us. But the election in November demonstrated that a significant proportion of our community has strong opinions about policies and where this country is going in the future. And the truth is that today there are many, many instances beyond the day that we vote to demonstrate our interest and concern about policy. We have to defeat this stereotype that the Latino community doesn't care about representation in the cabinet, that we don't care about representation on the media, that we don't care about representation on the corporate boards and in the offices of CEOs. As you mentioned, we have to demonstrate day in and day out that we do care. And there are mechanisms today. We've started out today talking about Twitter. We've talked about Facebook. There are mechanisms today that every day we can vote by demonstrating, stating that we care about these issues. And believe me, from the president on down, they pay attention. The White House has its own petition website these days. They pay attention to daily demonstrations of large numbers of people of concern about these issues. And we have work to do because those stereotypes are deep-seated. The notion that our community, in comparison to others, doesn't care about representation, I think is false, but we've got to demonstrate that it's false. And there are ways for us to do that. The history of our community, as of so many others, is that we've had civil rights heroes. My predecessors, the people who paved the way for me to be able to do the work that I do, for all of us to be able to do the work that we do. These were singular individuals, whether it was those who took the courage to step forward and be plaintiffs in lawsuits, and we still need those courageous plaintiffs. My colleague, Juan Cartagena from Latino Justice PearlDef, his organization and MALDEF, we need those courageous plaintiffs to step forward and challenge discrimination and injustice where they see it. Because they put more on the line than we do as lawyers. But more and more, this is not going to be a story about individual heroes. This is about all of us collectively, daily, heroically demonstrating that we really care and are concerned about these issues, and that's why we voted the way we did and will vote consistent with those who are making policy for our community in the future.
Let's take a look now at the issue of immigration reform and look at how the issue has been framed. And I'd first like to state a comment by the administration in the past year that immigration reform has not been the #1 concern of Latinos. It was jobs and economy. Hector, even though that might be true, is it not true that immigration reform and the dialogue and debate that surrounds it stigmatizes our community and marginalizes us in ways that we are perceived when we want to get other policy initiatives in education and economy looked at?
We voted with the economy in our head, but with immigration in our hearts. The negative aspect and the negative aspect of so much enforcement is devastating our communities, separating our families, increasing the hate crimes against Latinos by 45% in the last 5 years. This is a key issue for our community, and we cannot wait any longer to make sure that we have immigration reform. We need to really stop and think about immigration reform from a different perspective. I honestly believe that as a community, we are not the best negotiators when it comes to immigration reform because the issue is so close. The pain is so in our face because we are undocumented, or our families are undocumented, or our friends are undocumented, that sometimes, and I heard this from advocates, it's better to get legalization than nothing. Citizenship is non-negotiable, especially after what happened in this election. And we need to take the leverage as a community to really negotiate at that level. And we saw a drastic change in this election. We gave politicians every single argument to pass immigration reform. The economic argument, the civil rights argument, the human rights argument, the right thing to do, a lot of them don't care. Now we gave them an electoral reason to change their perspective. And what we saw, particularly in Republicans, the drastic change on the way they talk about opening the possibility of immigration reform is really something that we need to take in consideration. As a community, we need to be more aggressive. We need to, and as a nation, we need to stop blaming Latinos and immigrants for the issue of immigration. It's time that as a nation we grow up and we recognize that we have an addiction to cheap labor, and that we have been imposing economic policies in neighboring countries that displace workers. It's our fault as a nation. 12 million undocumented people in the nation is not a mistake. It is public policy, and we need to take it from that perspective. You say something very interesting, Giselle. You mentioned the boycott. I will ask all those anti-immigrant voices in the nation to be proactive in boycott. Boycott any vegetable that has been touched with immigrant hands. Boycott any house that has been built with immigrant hands. Don't drive in roads that have been built with immigrant hands, and then they will understand how critical or labor, how critical immigrants are for the development of the nation. We need to change the conversation right now.
Secretary Solis, Hector brings up the hypocrisy that this debate has even been launched on. We don't address that hypocrisy of that reliance on affordable labor. And yet we do address needing to link border security with immigration reform of our people. Let's just take that piece alone and dissect it and break it down, because I think it's important. Should immigration reform be inextricably linked to this idea of securing our borders when 74% of Latinos in this country, as Araceli pointed out, are legal, and more than 60, probably more percent, did not cross a border? Their papers expired from a broken bureaucracy. Are we addressing this hypocrisy? And if not, how do we?
Well, in my opinion, we're not. I mean, I know that in the last decade or so, even the last 5 years, the one agency that has really continued to grow exponentially has been Homeland Security. And it's precisely because of the tenor in the Congress and the Senate to beef up the border, to put an enormous amount of resources to try to level that off. What I will say is that the administration, this administration, did try to at least move in that direction where they could present that argument to those from the other side of the aisle that said that that was the only way they were going to even touch this subject. So now if you remove that, what else is left? Well, the facts are that we do have people that are U.S.-born citizens. You have mixed families. You have an enormous marketing power here of individuals who come from immigrant families who establish themselves here. There are all these positive things that have happened, but we don't have advocates also in the media. and also representing us in the House of Representatives and in the Senate that are also bringing forward those kinds of discussions. That's why I think it's really important when we talk about this issue overall that we have to understand that we have to bring other partners along. We need to have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, who's been more open and more progressive on this than perhaps in many years. Why are we not hearing from our brothers and sisters that are out there that have been working hard, that know what our marketing power is and what our potential is? Latinas, as a fact, have also been the engine of growth in terms of small business entrepreneurship. Why are we not talking about the positive aspects? You all here have a responsibility to do that, to know the facts, to know what our own makeup is, and we're not sharing it. And empowering other members that have a percentage of Latinos that are represented in that district. That probably in many cases was the margin of difference in us getting more Democratic seats in this election alone. And I can say that for the state of California. I know that for a fact. But we ought to be making sure that we are always on top of the issue, that we are bringing home that issue to these representatives. And I think that there is that change that I'm seeing, but change happens slow, and it's unfortunate because we want to be, ahorita. Queremos saber el cambio ahorita. And it doesn't always work that way, but we have to look at where we came from and where we want to go, and work collectively with other people to build those coalitions.
Thank you. Tom, why hasn't the issue of immigration reform and the connection to border security and getting back of the line when that line has always been redrawn for Hispanics trying to find a pathway to citizenship, having to pay, back taxes and fees when we never got the full protection for the work we have done over the years? Why doesn't this fall under a major class action, discrimination suit, as it would in any other business?
Well, if only we had the right under our Constitution to accomplish that kind of change, I know that many of us would be in court tomorrow. But our Constitution grants tremendous authority to the federal government to engage in policies that would not be constitutionally permitted in any other arena. That's why we have this facially discriminatory immigration policy where you wait longer than a similarly situated immigrant if you are from Mexico, if you are from a handful of other countries. That's in our law. But people assume that's not the case because they have been taught that since Brown versus Board of Education, that kind of facial discrimination is not permitted. The one area where it is permitted because of the power that is granted under our Constitution to the Congress is in immigration. So it's upon us to expose the lie. We know from experience in our families and our neighbors' families that this is the reality, that when you face a decade, 20 years wait, when you're in line to get a legal visa, that's often why people end up coming here to reunite with their families. We have to expose what our laws are today because people assume they are otherwise. Another aspect of exposing the lie is talking about this issue. Do we need to be talking about more enforcement and border security when today our federal government spends more money on immigration enforcement than all other federal law enforcement combined? That's more than FBI, together with ATF, together with DEA. Now, to me, those are not the priorities of this country. Those are misguided spending decisions. We've got to expose that and talk about what more is needed. As the Secretary said, so much has already been done, and much of it, in my view, overkill. There's no reason for us to be setting records on deportations. We've got to expose what the laws are today, how they are discriminatory and unfair, and that we demand that they be changed, and that we adopt policies for those who were discriminated against in a legalization program that recognizes the flaws in our policies.
Secretary, please, yes. Secretary Solis, in your remarks, you linked the future economy, the healthy, vibrant future economy of this country on immigration reform. But it is perceived nationally as a brown problem, as a Hispanic community problem, and not as an economic problem. Same thing with our education crisis. Hector, how do we change that? How do we get the nation to see this issue of immigration reform not as a immigrant labor force that is taking jobs away from Americans and depleting the country, but actually contributing to the country? I think, Araceli, you pointed out 3.3, or you, Secretary Solis, that the dreamers alone could contribute $3.3 trillion to our economy if they were allowed to stay and contribute to this country.
There is enough research on the right and on the left of the contribution of immigrants to the nation and what it means for immigration reform in economic terms. There is one study that shows that immigration reform will bring $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years to the nation. Why are we debating this at a time when we are in the worst recession since the Great Depression? Doesn't it make sense? And I want to tell you something very interesting that Tom mentioned, that I'm very worried about. We're debating immigration, and we may not have a solid fighter like Secretary Solis to be on the table, but I'm really worried of having somebody like Secretary Napolitano, who seems to be obsessed with deportations, and a president that is obviously obsessed with deportations. We don't have somebody really telling the story of our communities, the devastation that it represents, having historical numbers of deportations. Secretary Napolitano has a quota of 400,000 deportations per year, and it's not only undocumented immigrants, the effect that it has in every community. A recent report shows that in the last 2 years, 200,000 undocumented people were deported that have children that aren't U.S. citizens. What is the question that we need to ask as a nation for the future of those children, the economic implications that is going to have, and not only obviously the negative aspect that it will have in the community. From the workers' perspective, as a LACLA, we are an organization that is committed to defend and protect the most vulnerable workers in the nation. And talking about vulnerable workers, there is not a better fighter than advocate than what Secretary Solis did for the last 4 years. She launched a series called Vulnerable Workers in the Nation, and we joined with the Secretary to talk about our campaign, Trabajadoras, and you have a sample of our report. With all these anti-immigrant policies in the nation, our community and our workers have become much more vulnerable, much more exploitable. I'm going to say a couple of numbers just to show the reality that this is not just policy talking in general, this is something that is injected in all our people on the ground. Latinas have the biggest wage theft in the nation. Latinas make only 60 cents, that's the biggest wage theft in the nation. Latinas have the highest level of sexual harassment and abuse and violence in the workplace. Or Latinas, especially our undocumented sisters, are becoming so vulnerable and they're so afraid of all this immigration enforcement that a lot of violations are taking place. The highest levels of death and injuries at work. So because of all this, and as LACLA, we've been working on our campaign that is called Trabajadoras to make sure that we protect, that we educate, that we advocate, and anybody that respects our sisters in the workplace, that they're respecting LACLA, that they're respecting the labor movement, that they're respecting the Latino community, and we are not going to allow that. That's why, going back to the issue of immigration reform, it's so urgent to really get this workplace defense on the ground in the workplaces, but immigration reform is urgent. We cannot wait anymore.
And I want to get more in depth into worker protection in a moment. I know you have a program with Latinas at the Department of Labor as well, Secretary Solis, that we'll get to. But first, Tom, sum it up for us, if you will. So, this is a huge debate. Finally, we've engaged a bipartisan conversation on immigration reform. But have we even launched the debate from a fair and just platform? And if not, how do we alter this course to correct it?
I think we have to make it clear that in the Latino community, we want a fair, reasonable debate that is based on facts and the truth of the law. We're not interested in symbols, we're not interested in slogans, we're not interested in rhetoric that does not accurately reflect the current immigration laws that we have, that does not accurately reflect the current situation in terms of immigration enforcement in this country. But for anyone on either side of the aisle who's interested in engaging in a fact-driven, law-driven discussion of what needs to be reformed about our policy, we're ready to have that kind of a sophisticated discussion.
We have diverse voices within our own community.
The lesson from November was that we are interested in sophisticated policy and we can discern what is good, well-informed policy from rhetoric. And I think an important point, Giselle, is that this has to be a bipartisan discussion. The history of immigration in this country is a bipartisan history. The last measure that was taken to provide relief for those who were here without legal protections was signed by Ronald Reagan, probably the #1 icon of the Republican Party. Unfortunately, we have strayed from a situation where this is viewed as a bipartisan issue. But we have to welcome voices from both parties who are interested in having a debate and discussion about what the real policy is today and what it needs to be tomorrow. And I think that our votes in November, if you look at them from the standpoint of the sophistication, the wisdom that was shown, demonstrate that that's the kind of policy debate we want to have. We've all seen the principles. The principles look good as principles. But what matters is in the details. And what matters is in the policy that's adopted. And that's where we are very interested in having a debate that shows a level of truth and sophistication that regrettably we have yet to see.
Let's go back to worker protection as it does pertain to immigration reform. Secretary Solis, the Department of Labor did some extensive work and outreach specifically to Latinas, but if you'll tell us the state of worker protection for our community.
You know, when the president was elected back in 2009, and we were going through the recession, he really worked hard to see that the Department of Labor could help restore the number of investigators and employees that were engaged in wage theft and oversight of that. So we were able to hire up about 710 investigators, 300 of them in the wage and hour division. OSHA now has individuals that speak our language. They can go out in the field, an agricultural site, an assembly line, or a chemical plant, and actually discern what is going on. If there are problems with wage theft, misclassification. We haven't even talked about just the current laws that aren't being enforced overall. And I can't just fault the federal government, because you have state agencies that are also involved in the enforcement of labor laws. So we could be running Cal OSHA on a federal level, but you may have a state that decides they want to take it over. They will then do what they want to do, and if you have a governor that doesn't agree with the policies of this administration, they'll go the other way. They'll actually cut back on enforcement, and they will put that pile of complaints at the bottom of the list. That's why I want to say thank you to the American Bar Association, because we don't have enough wage and hour investigators to be able to go through all the complaints that we are given. And we partnered, we did an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the ABA, so that we could help create some incentive for people to go forward and bring about these atrocities that go on. Wage theft is a big problem for this economy. Billions of dollars go unrecorded. That money is being lost on us because it doesn't go into education, doesn't go into legal services, it doesn't go into public housing, and all the other things that help provide for a decent welfare for our communities. So I think that the president has done as much as he can. We need to do more though. I know we do in terms of agriculture. We still have to have protections for young people, young children that work in our fields. I just want to give you an example of something that happened 2 years ago. We saw some complaints coming out of Maine where immigrants were being brought in to work in the fields to have their children, infants, go out and pick blueberries. And I asked, why children, infants, 5 years old, 3 years old? And they told me the reason that they brought them in from Mexico was because these children, the infants and parents that were not well versed in our laws, these children would not crush the blueberries. So they had these children working in the fields in Maine and other parts in the Northeast. So we did a strike force. What we did was we went after that particular industry, and as a result we were able to inform the community of their rights. We made sure that those children were in school, and we made sure that there was appropriate child care and assistance for those families. That's something that has never happened before at the Department of Labor, and it was done in collaboration with immigrant groups, faith-based, and other key players, CBOs, community-based groups. But that's a different model that we're using that had been implemented at the Department of Labor. I think other agencies could be doing the same thing, but I'm just telling you, maybe it does take someone to look at a problem a little differently, but it's bringing in other resources because the federal government can't do it all alone.
Well, Araceli, you work very closely with corporations and their corporate legal teams. What responsibility or interest does corporate America have to engage in this issue of worker protection?
Well, I really can't speak for the corporate legal departments or the corporations. It's not something I've had the opportunity to ask them or engage them in, so I can't speculate about that.
Are you meeting the legal needs of immigrants who have these kinds of issues and challenges?
Who?
Is the ABA?
Oh, the American Bar Association is working to do that, and that was part of this initiative in this report, to really determine what are the legal challenges and the responsibilities that the Latino community has to overcome some of these legal hurdles. And so, you know, as part of that, the report is not only bringing to light, but also recommendations, and in addition to that, highlighting work that other entities within the American Bar Association are engaging in these efforts. As the Secretary mentioned, efforts in this Memorandum of Understanding, but also resolution before the ABA House of Delegates on language access in the courts. To again, once these problems do arise, there is an ability to engage the justice system in eradicating them in a meaningful manner. So there's a variety of mechanisms within the organization to address this, but also to help take positions and promote certain positions and to inform these positions.
Did you find it to be hopeful, Tom, this commission's findings?
I was very honored to be asked by the first ever Latino president of the American Bar Association, Stephen Zach, to serve on the Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities, where Araceli was our very, very capable staff leader in making sure that we had an opportunity as a body to explore all of these issues of the Latino community's role in the legal system, and where the legal system, frankly, needs to be reoriented, recalibrated, to better serve the demography of our country today, including that component of it that is Latino. And I think that the potential for the ABA, with continued strong leadership to focus on some of these issues, is tremendous. One of the things that came out of this effort through Araceli's good work and that of others was the unanimous passage of a resolution by the House of Delegates 2 years ago that basically rejected the then prevalent attempts to change the rule of citizenship by birth. At the time, there were a number of right-wing restrictionists who thought that they could, through state legislation, change our long-standing interpretation and correct interpretation of the 14th Amendment, that anyone born in this country is a citizen by virtue of their birth here. Those efforts at state legislative level, at the congressional level that were just beginning to take off, were rejected unanimously by the ABA House of Delegates. And it's that kind of attention to issues when they arise and ongoing concerns about the legal community serving Latinos that can be better addressed by the ABA, and this development I think was an encouraging one. But it's important again to note the critical role of that first Latino ABA president. It's not just about symbolism. It makes a difference when you get someone at the top of an organization who, through their family and their community, understands these issues and the critical importance of putting a very, very careful microscope on the issues faced by the Latino community.
And it's not just a matter of putting a spotlight, but it's also how are you preparing the hundreds of thousands of lawyers in this country to better serve this growing community, all of their legal needs, whether they are a business owner or whether they're seeking an order of protection because they're facing domestic violence. How do you prepare these attorneys, provide them with the linguistic competency, the cultural competency, the technical competency to serve this community? And that is something that the Commission also looked at very carefully in ways that could be promoted within the organization, whether it be through their House of Delegates or through their substantive sections.
And this is a perfect segue into the education crisis that so stigmatizes our community and holds us back from attaining these higher positions in corporate America, the seat at the table, in the boardrooms, etc. We have a huge education gap in this country. We graduate 11, 12% of students from college, very few in the STEM fields, science, math, engineering, technology. How are we going to compete in a global economy if we make up a quarter of the college-age population and graduate 12% of our kids? This is a huge economic crisis. Arnie Duncan just came out with a report, Tom, specifically addressing this issue. Have we come up with any new pathways to somehow creating some hope here?
I think that the Equity and Excellence Commission report that came out this week, that Secretary Duncan released this week, is an important step because it acknowledges what you've just so clearly described, which is the future of this country requires solving this issue of equity of outcome in education. We simply cannot, as a nation, expect to continue to thrive unless we invest in deriving systems that will close that education gap. That starts, in my view, and this is highlighted in the Equity and Excellence Report, with having systems in place that are equitable at the level of inputs, meaning that we have to finally, some 40 years after the Supreme Court decided in Rodriguez versus San Antonio Independent School District that there is no constitutional right to an equitable education, and therefore through all of these issues to state courts. But after 40 years, we have to, as a nation, decide that we are going to have equitable finance systems. A team of MALDEF lawyers just came out of another case in Texas, successfully, I'm proud to say successfully challenging the inequities in the finance system for Texas schools, where schools in wealthier areas get more money and those in poorer areas get less. And we know the impact of that. We've got to fix the equity of the inputs on the education side, starting with money, but also extending to teachers and their qualifications. We cannot continue to have a situation where the best and most qualified teachers are concentrated in the schools with kids that least need those best and most qualified teachers. We've also got to ensure that we have in place systems to get us equity of outcome, where if you don't deliver closing on that education gap, if you don't deliver real progress in closing the education gap, there are mechanisms for parents and the entire community to hold our education system accountable. And I don't mean stopgap measures. Our debate in education has focused on things in recent years like charter schools, like parent triggers. These are all demonstrations that our existing accountability system does not serve the Latino community in particular very well. But we've got to have systems in place that ensure success across the board in closing that education gap. And the Equity and Excellence Commission report, I think, is a first step toward ensuring that we are focusing on this issue as a national imperative.
Well, if this issue is already complicated, it's about to get a lot more complicated. We have Fisher versus University of Texas, which threatens to shut down affirmative action in higher education, and we're expecting an announcement from the Supreme Court any day now. Tom, Hector, Secretary, please weigh in. What happens if we shut down affirmative action?
I think the first step, we don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do, but it's certainly of great concern that only 10 years after they previously decided that these admissions programs designed to ensure equity of opportunity could continue, they're revisiting the issue. But whatever the outcome is, if the outcome is to say that these kinds of race-conscious admissions programs cannot continue or must be modified and narrowed, we have to make sure in our community that we are working with institutions of higher education, public and private, to derive systems of selection that are equitable systems of selection. The reason we have affirmative action in the first place is that we know that our existing selection mechanisms show consistent discriminatory effects and bias. We know that the systems kindergarten through 12th grade from which applicants are coming are not systems of equity. We've got to ensure if the tool of affirmative action is taken away or unduly restricted, we have to ensure ever more that there is equity of opportunity in the feeder institutions, kindergarten through 12th grade and beyond, and that there is equity in those selection mechanisms, and we've got to demand it.
Well, obviously, we've got a lot of work to do there, and at the same time, we look at the DREAM Act, which still has yet to pass across this nation. Secretary Solis, Hector, please weigh in. Are we going to see the passage of the DREAM Act? Are the Dreamers going to be allowed to stay beyond the 2-year and the time is already clicking?
Well, I certainly hope that members of the other side of the aisle that had not been supportive previously in the last debate when that bill was brought up in the Senate, that there will be a change in that mindset, and that should be one of the more easily parts of the comprehensive immigration reform that goes through. That, and also this whole issue, and we talked a little bit about it with regard to STEM, engineers, entrepreneurs, people that are being educated now at our universities. And when you hear that discussion, I get a little concerned, because when we talk about it, where it has been brought up, we tend to talk about folks from other countries like China and India and other places. And we don't really think about Latin America or even those dreamers and folks that are here that currently could be eligible to stay here and contribute and actually have already shown and proven that they can generate their own businesses. So I think that when we start talking about that, when the details start to be talked about, that we really do need to focus in on fairness. This is what Tom was talking about, making sure that we really expose the law to say that there has to be fair representation and who's allowed to get that green card and why is it that we need so many entrepreneurs in these or engineers in these specific areas or from these countries and why not others. And so we do have to have a more balanced discussion there, and that's going to come from advocates and people out in the community. So I'm ready to engage in that and hope that more people will join in that discussion, because I think we'll be cutting ourselves off at the knees if we just let it go as just something to grant a green card to people who come from other countries because they're going to stay here and not reward those that we know are already here based on racial or other kinds of indicators that we don't like to talk about, but nonetheless are there.
I know each of you has something to say, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to give you a chance to sum up, your final comments in a minute. But I would like to address one last issue of great importance, and that is voter rights. And I know there's a couple of cases before the Supreme Court, Tom. What should we be looking for to ensure that redistricting does not impact unfavorably our community?
I think we should be very concerned about what may be happening out of these Supreme Court cases and watch very carefully those outcomes and work to change policy in light of those outcomes. Two critical cases. February 27th, the Supreme Court will hear argument in a case called Shelby County versus Holder. That's a case out of Alabama that challenges the constitutionality of one critical section of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, that requires jurisdictions that have a demonstrated history of discrimination in voting to subject all of their changes to preclearance. It's this provision that prior to the last election kept the state of Texas from implementing its very draconian voter ID laws, and it's important for us to know that. Second case, March 18th being argued, a case where MALDEF is counsel, a case called the Intertribal Council of Arizona versus Arizona. It's a case involving the National Voting Registration Act, or motor voter, and whether that preempts an Arizona law that would require everyone registering to vote in Arizona to demonstrate proof of citizenship. A limited set of proof that lots and lots of people who are completely, clearly eligible to vote would not be able to obtain and present in order to register. Again, this case, because we were successful so far, prevented the state of Arizona from stopping registrations prior to the last election. The Supreme Court has both of those cases. We'll decide by the end of June. We've got to watch them for their outcomes, and when those outcomes are known, we've got to work together to derive policies that will ensure that there is continued vigorous protection of the right to vote and the right to register for all of us.
Right. If you'll each now take a minute to sum up what you believe to be the most imperative issues facing Latinos in America today. Hector?
No, I just want to continue with what just Tom say. Organizations like mine, we were on the ground, we're doing voter registration, GOTV, voter education, mobilizing the vote. Sometimes it was so hard just to see the difficulty in seeing voter suppression in presence. When we were in Florida, 6 hours lines, people with that heat being dehydrated. When we went to Ohio, when we went to Nevada, Colorado, all these efforts to really exclude a particular group of people, the majority of those African Americans and Latinos, is really an attack on democracy. As I say before, we really embrace democracy, but the work that MALDEF is doing, the work that Cartagena and others are doing is exemplary, and we are fully on board as a coalition, as an organization. But obviously we need to continue being strategic, and I know I mentioned a lot of challenges, but I honestly believe that the future of the nation is going to be really good when we see the bright aspects of our community. And I want to mention, just to close, the dreamers. What example and what inspiration of see young, passionate people putting their life naturally on the line for a cause, saying this is not right for the nation, saying we can have a better nation, mobilizing, organizing. So I honestly believe that we're going to have a better nation, and I can't wait to have the first dream and be elected to office.
Thank you, Hector. Araceli?
I think mine is more of a challenge to the Latino community and to my fellow Latinos to really embrace the challenge of educating each of us individually someone about our community, the diversity within our community, our challenges, our hopes, our aspirations. I think we can make we can change many hearts and minds by taking a moment to educate folks about our community, which is something that has just not been done. And I think that all of us here, one of the main things we've done is share information and educate each other on the various areas that we focus on. And so I think it's a challenge and a call that we take the time to educate people about our community.
Thank you so much. Secretary Solis?
Well, I think all the topics we covered today are all very important, but one that continues to hit home for me is the fact that we still need to bring our families along. So education, yes, it has to happen out in the community, but it has to happen at home. We have a lot of immigrant families here whose parents are not schooled here, have maybe less than a third grade level education. Most of our workforce, and this is across the board, not just for Latinos, have less than an 8th grade education. So when we talk about education and where we go in the future in terms of economic strength, we've got to think about every aspect of it, whether you're the child, the pre-kindergarten, to the adult. Learning has to continue, and we have to continue to have involvement by our business community to help provide skills too, whether it's on the assembly line, to allow for our parents who are working in factories or wherever to also gain skills, literacy. That's going to be really important, and just continue to fund more equitable and fair education for all of us.
Thank you, Secretary Solis. Tom?
Well, I've said it throughout today. I think we have to establish that the real lesson of November 2012 was about the Latino community's interest in truthful and sophisticated policy making that will serve our entire nation, that will recognize the critical importance of our community, from those without status to those who have been citizens for generations, that will recognize the critical importance of our future, of ensuring that education is provided that serves the entire country, including the 1 in 5 school children who are Latino. The real lesson of November 2012 is that we will not be fooled by switches and changes. We will not be fooled by symbols. We will not be fooled by tokenism. We want to see the details of real policy to serve 21st century America.
Thank you very much, Tom. Secretary Solis, before we sign out, do you want to say what your next steps might be, your next chapter?
Well, I hope to go home and continue to be a part of civic and community activism, and hopefully seek, again, public office.
LA County Supervisor, perhaps?
Well, we don't know yet.
Governor of California? We'll be watching out for you for sure. Thank you all so very much. It is clear from our discussion today that while we have made tremendous progress, we must remain vigilant in our pursuit of real change for Latinos and for the entire nation. It is our hope that this forum has provided some of the critical tools we all need to lead this forum, seize upon the areas of consensus, and help one another in service of our collective goal, to improve life for Latinos and for all Americans. On behalf of MALDEF, muchísimas gracias. Thank you.
And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land and